So now it's my great pleasure to introduce Carl Homstad. Carl was born and raised in Denver, Colorado. He came to Decorah, Iowa for college and has remained in Northeast Iowa ever since. Carl may be best known for murals in communities throughout Iowa and the Midwest. In fact, there are 3 within spitting distance of us here at the museum. But his 50-year career spans far beyond the walls of the buildings his murals adorn. We are very excited to share the exhibition of Carl's work. Not only will you get to see examples of Carl's body of work, but you'll have the opportunity to learn about his creative processes, his career as an artist, and his personal journey. Thank you for taking us on these journeys, Carl.
Hello, I'm Carl Homstad. This exhibit is called The Artist's Journey for 3 reasons. First, it shows the journey of my life. Secondly, it shows the journey of my career as an artist. And the third theme is my actual journeys. That is the subject of this video. This story begins when I came to Luther College in 1969. I came from my sister's graduation from Luther, but instead of going to the ceremony, I floated down the Upper Iowa River. That was when I decided to attend Luther. I have studied art here, and I have lived near Decorah ever since. My first big journey was when I spent my junior year at Luther College studying abroad in Vienna, Austria. This is a view from Chartres Cathedral. Vienna was a great location in the center of Europe, and in the 9 months there, I went to many countries, from Norway to Turkey. Each full moon, we would make it a point to go somewhere special, and that figures into my other journeys. After I graduated in 1973, I took off hitchhiking from my home in Denver with no money and all my things in an Army surplus gas mask bag. I was able to travel all the way to the Northwest and then to the East Coast. On my way back to Denver, I rode in an open rail car from Reno to Salt Lake City. After riding for 14 hours, I woke up as the train was crossing the Great Salt Lake at dawn. I painted this picture from memory 30 years later. I was married in 1979 to Andrea Austin, and for our honeymoon, we traveled around Europe for 4 months. On that trip, I painted 40 watercolors, and we went to more than 30 museums. This is one of the paintings I did on that trip from the Lake District of England. This is a photo that Andrea took of me painting this picture. While camping on the Isle of Skye, I took a photo of us camping on the shoreline, and then did a painting from that photo many years later. If you look closely, you can see Andrea cooking at our camp and my easel set up to paint a watercolor. I would travel back to Denver for Christmas, and we always tried to do some backcountry skiing, as in this watercolor of Mount Evans. This painting is from a trip I took with Andrea. We started in Silverton, Colorado, hiked up to the Continental Divide, and after a few days hiking along the Divide Trail, we went down to Elk Park and took the narrow gauge railroad back to Silverton. In 1999, I was invited to take a trip down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. We floated for 2 weeks. I took more than 800 photos and did a few watercolors and drawings. This oil is based on one of those watercolors. In 2003, I asked my roommate from Vienna, Neil Burkhead, to put together the greatest trip in the world and take me with him. So he immediately said China. And we saw the Great Wall and many places in Beijing, including the Forbidden City. We also saw the terracotta warriors in Xi'an, and went to Hangzhou and Shanghai. Like the old days in Vienna, we spent the full moon in a very special place, in this case, Lhasa, Tibet. In 2005, I went to Alaska. I rented a car and traveled between Mount Denali and Homer with a side trip to Seldovia. I have been to New York City several times, and on this particular occasion, I was staying with a friend, and he had to walk his dog late one night. It happened to be during a blizzard, and if you look closely at the painting, you can see that the only other person outside is delivering carry-out food on a bicycle. I am very interested in Asian art, and my daughter Lisa wanted to go to Japan, so we went there in 2006. We spent some time working through the WOOF program, which stands for Willing Workers on Organic Farms, where you work in a foreign country for your room and board, which we did in Nikko, Japan. We also visited Tokyo, Kyoto, and Nara. In the background of this painting, the Todaji Temple is the site of the giant Buddha. I was in Japan for 2 weeks, and my daughter stayed for 3 months. I have always loved canoeing and kayaking. This is a scene of the sea caves in the Apostle Islands National Park. Many people have taken advantage of the cold weather up there and hiked out to the caves on the ice. I've canoed a lot on the Mississippi River and also in the boundary waters on both sides of the American and Canadian borders. This picture, called Hot Coffee, shows a friend of mine making coffee in the boundary waters. In 2010, I drove to Nova Scotia and I went through Niagara Falls, Montreal, and Quebec City on the way there, and then took the Cabot Trail around Cape Breton and camped at Meat Cove on the northwest tip of the Cape. I chose this painting to represent the show because of the great location and the fire, which in a way represents inspiration. In 2021, I was asked to do a presentation on culture and sustainability at a conference in San Diego. On the way home, we visited Zion, Arches, and Bryce Canyons in Utah. My next major trip was to New Zealand. My daughter and I spent 2 weeks there. I rented a camper van for a week and drove around the South Island. A highlight of that part of the trip was an excursion to Doubtful Sound in Fiordland. On each end of our tour, we spent time with my cousin in Auckland, and this painting is from Waiheke Island, which is in Auckland Harbor. This other painting is from Lion Rock, which is on the north side of the North Island. I've always loved the Mountain West, and lately I've been going to Montana. This is a ski area at Red Lodge. Not too far from here is East Rosebud Lake, which is shown in this painting. I also love to sail and have sailed to Mackinac Island. It is a unique location because they don't allow cars on the island, so all the transportation is by horses or bicycles. Closer to home, this is a painting from Fayette, Michigan. Fayette is on the Garden Peninsula of Upper Michigan. I have sailed there from Door County, Wisconsin several times. Of course, you don't have to travel the world to get great scenery. This painting is from the Upper Iowa River downstream from Decorah.
And now we'll welcome Carl Homstad. Carl, thank you for being with us today.
Well, you're sure welcome, and I certainly appreciate the chance to not only have the exhibit, but to do these online presentations for people that may not be able to get to Decorah, or even if you have seen the show, maybe you'll get a few extra insights about it.
Well, it's great to be able to see the video and have you help us focus in on some different elements in the paintings, things I hadn't noticed even in the gallery.
Yeah, great.
Wonderful. Well, this is the perfect time for you, our audience, to ask questions for Carl. You can type them into the Q&A function. You can find the button at the bottom of your screen, and please type in a question, or maybe it's a comment for Carl, and we'll share those. While you're getting started, I'll maybe start with a question myself. Which came first, your love of art or your love of travel?
I'd have to say art. I drew a lot in kindergarten, and when I was growing up, when we'd go to church, I'd fill all the little communion cards with drawings, and finally at school, I drew so much in my notebooks that I started to take notes in my sketchbooks. But my father went to Luther, and he took a band trip when he was a student way back in '36, and so he had a love of travel. And each of my siblings and I did spend our time in Europe studying, so that was a real opportunity. And we'd often travel as a family down from Denver down into the Southwest, Four Corners and Taos and Santa Fe.
Nice. So one of our questions has already come in. The full moon reference that you made in traveling, that you like to spend the full moon nights traveling and also painting. When did that start?
That really started in Vienna because, we kind of made it a point of several of my friends and I to get out on the night of the full moon, regardless of what night of the week it was. We would take a trip, to the edge of Vienna or walk around town at night, or a lot of times we'd go camping in the Vienna woods. And, that's something I've kept up all these years. I like to ski in the full moon in the wintertime and just hike it. I just really like the light, and I don't actually paint out in the when I'm outdoors in the full moon. I usually get back in the studio, but a friend of mine said, why don't you try that? And so maybe I will try painting at night by the full moon.
So you still, even when you're not on vacation, go out when the moon is full and experience nature?
Yeah, right. I don't really, a lot of times I just go out and outdoors and do things, and then I get ideas, spontaneously, rather than, going out specifically to look for them. But when I travel, then I am looking for, ideas to paint.
And you mentioned that you often take photographs when you travel and then often make artworks from the photographs. Do the photos by themselves ever suffice to capture your experience?
I don't think so. I'm not a great photographer, and I kind of use them more as a reference, and I try to get pieces of a picture. I might have an idea of an overall picture based on, my trip, and then a lot of times photography falls short of what I want, and so I kind of use it as a means to an end more than an end in itself. But I do have some panoramic photos in the show that I thought were good enough, to show on their own.
And when you're traveling and thinking about art, what proportion of the work is done while you're on location? Do you usually do most of the artwork on location? Do you do a portion and then finish in the studio? Could you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, mostly I just take photos. I plan the trip in advance, and I try to be in a really nice spot, what's called the golden hour, which is just after sunrise and just before sunset, when the colors are real warm because the sun's either coming up or going down. And so then I try to arrange a trip so that I'm at a beautiful spot in the morning, early morning, and then I travel to a different spot and try to get there in the evening. And so there's the work of traveling around and getting yourself in the right place. And the main thing about landscape painting is getting yourself in the right spot at the right time. And so that is a job in itself. But I do some sketches, but I mostly take photos. And then, like I said, I take the photos as sort of a reference, to remember a particular thing or a certain shape. And then usually I, make up my own colors and usually move elements around, leave things out, put different things into the final painting, because I think I can improve on the photograph. And as a painter, it's a nice thing because you don't have to have it there. You can say, oh, that'd be great if there were some kids playing on that beach, or if there was somebody walking down that path, or if there weren't so many cars in this picture. And then, I can do that somewhat in Photoshop, and I can do whatever I want when I paint. So that's a great thing about painting.
Well, I know you teach entire workshops on how to enhance digital photography for artistic purposes. I know you could say a lot, but could you share with us a little bit? Do you have some suggestions or things that we as maybe amateurs could try?
Yeah. I've used photography for quite a while, and in the old days, I used to literally cut and paste. So I'd maybe take a sky out of one picture, and I'd cut it out, and I'd tape it onto another picture. And so there's that, in any digital program for working with photos. You can crop, which is important. You can change the tone, color, exposure, saturation, a lot of those other things. And then another thing I would do is I would go, and this is before digital photography, I take 16 or 20 pictures. I take 4 across the sky, 4 along the horizon, 4 along the foreground, maybe 4, in the very foreground. And then I would go back and tape those together to make a panorama. And then, now you can just, even your phone will let you take a panoramic photo. And that'll just make a long strip, but you can also take, 3 panoramic photos and then combine them in Photoshop. There's a function that'll combine photos into panorama. And then another breakthrough is that photography has certain limitations, and your eye has a terrific ability to see various shades and things simultaneously. So it's called the dynamic range, and it's the difference between the lightest thing in a photo and the darkest. And photography more or less can only pick one area, and then a lot of it's too light or too dark in the shadows, too light in the sky perhaps. And so now there's a new technique called high dynamic range photography. And what that does is it takes several different exposures, and then it takes the best exposure for each part. So it might be slightly overexposed in the shadows, and then maybe average exposure in the middle, and then it might be underexposed in the sky. And so if you see these photos that look very like painting, those are oftentimes high dynamic range photos, because painters have been doing that all along. They've been picking the best exposure, if you want to call it that, or the best representation of each part, regardless of its brightness or darkness. So, and then I started taking high dynamic range photos, and then combining them in panoramas. And so anyway, it's you can learn all this stuff on YouTube, but there's a lot you can do with a camera nowadays.
Well, it's interesting to hear you, who often do paintings and watercolors, to talk about using photographs. It seems like these should be very separate activities, but you're finding inspiration both ways and combining them.
Yeah, artists have used photography since photography was invented. And the way I see it, it's all about the image, and I just use whatever I can to get the best image, the final image. And sometimes, a lot of times photography is part of that, and then maybe I might do an ink wash study to get the composition, and then thumbnails. So there's different things that go into making a painting, and I don't think photography is just one of the tools I use.
Perfect. If you could live anywhere outside of Decorah, where would it be?
I already live outside of Decorah.
Further outside of Decorah.
But I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. I might live on the ocean somewhere. Maybe. I haven't been to Hawaii yet, but I'm going this summer. So maybe I could end up there. I don't know.
Well, that was one of our questions too, is where are you traveling next?
Yeah, I'm going to Hawaii in June, and I'm going to go to the island of Kauai and poke around there and take pictures and look for scenery there. And I've been to every state but Hawaii, so.
Well, and I'll invite our audience today, if you'd like to use the chat function and put in a suggestion of a place that you think Carl should go to paint or draw or photograph. Maybe it's a very specific place like a state park, or maybe it's a larger place like a country or a region. Why don't you type those in and we'll share those with Carl? I don't think he's lacking for ideas, but we'll be happy to share those with you. In addition to the landscapes in exotic locations, do you also seek out the art of other countries or other cultures? And if so, have any of those had a particular impact on your work?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And yeah, I didn't mention it, but a big part of my travels is I always go to museums, art museums, cultural museums, history museums. And I get lots and lots of ideas, from that. Like in New Zealand, I saw a lot of really interesting Maori art and sculpture. And so looking at artwork wherever I go is always a big part of it. And even when I travel around the U.S., I try to go to art museums whenever I in the neighborhood. And then I have to say that the ones that have affected me the most is when I went to New York City. At the time I was doing mostly woodblock prints, but I went to New York City in the late 80s, and I saw a show of Winslow Homer's that just blew me away. And then I thought, well, he started out, making wood engravings and etchings, and then, is a world famous painter. So I started doing more painting then. And then eventually I really got interested in Asian art, and particularly Japanese woodblock prints. They're just fantastic. And, I've seen many, many exhibits of those. And then also the ink wash painting, sume ink, or, just black and white ink wash paintings. And there's about a dozen I've done over 300 ink wash paintings, and the best dozen or so are in the exhibit.
We've already had one suggestion of a place that you can go and paint or sketch or photograph, and that's the Dockstein Mountains above Hallstatt in Austria. So we've had one suggestion already.
Yeah, actually, I was skiing in Austria. I think not too far from Hallstatt, and yeah, that's Austria is a wonderful country. Yeah, very beautiful.
We've had a couple questions about your murals. Even though we're talking today primarily about some of the travels that you've done, you've also done a lot of traveling within Iowa. Could you mention just a little bit before we get to the murals, the work that you had done traveling to different communities and schools in Iowa?
Yeah, I was on the touring art team where we would go teach art in little towns, a team of 7 different artists in different disciplines. And we'd go to little towns in the summer and set up in a fire hall or school gymnasium or something. And we'd teach classes. You know, there was a musician and a poet and a dancer and a visual artist. And we'd teach classes there and then, to all ages, and then we'd put on a show the first night, and we'd have more classes the second day, and then they'd put on a show. The townspeople would read their poetry, you know, sing songs they wrote. We'd show artwork that they'd made, and then we'd move to the next town. I did that for 5 years. That program went on for about 7 or 8 years in total, and then I also did artists in the schools for about 10 years, where I would come in and then we would, a lot of times I'd do printmaking with elementary where they'd make prints using styrofoam or rubber stamps. And then later on I did a lot of murals with high school students. And, you know, we painted over 100 murals in high schools across Iowa. And I have a map in the show, and I've worked in over 130 cities and towns in Iowa. So they're all marked out there on the map. I wouldn't have remembered otherwise, but I kind of kept track that way.
If someone was interested in seeing some of your murals, is there a way to find out where they are?
Yeah, there's a book called Iowa Murals, and there's a list of them in there. There's a list of them at in the show. There's over big ones that I've painted. There's more than 40 of those, and on my website carlart.com there's a list of the murals too, and there's pictures probably of about a dozen of the murals.
Excellent. So I think we'll all want to do some traveling of our own to see a few of those.
Yeah, you can see 5 in Decorah.
They're great. And such a variety too. Some of them are little snippets of town life or everyday life, and there's also snippets of nature.
Mm-hmm.
Could you mention the ones in Decorah?
Yeah, there's one that's right across from the museum that's on the Chamber of Commerce, and it shows people doing outdoor activities. There's a skier and a bicycle rider and a canoe, a couple people in a canoe, and then trout fishermen. And they're it shows the 4 seasons in Decorah in kind of a oval frame. And then I was lucky enough, I'm good friends with a teacher here, Phil Oden, who does wood carving in the Norwegian style, and then he did a drawing of a canthus leaf type carving that I used for the frame on that mural. And then a couple of murals I worked in conjunction with Vesterheim. Daryl Henning helped me find photos, and if you just go down about a half a block from the museum, there's a picture of Water Street in the 1880s, and I painted the painting about the 1980s, and it's a actual picture from that same spot looking kind of from Mechanic Street down Water Street. And I always try to put in a little kind of extra, item, personal item, and then it turns out that in that mural, there was the Marsh, LL Marsh farm implement factory right there in the corner. And then there happened to be a Marsh tobacco planter in the mill, horse-drawn tobacco planter. So I put that out in the street, and I had a person with an old-fashioned camera taking a picture of that farm implement. And then the next one would be, there's some fake windows painted on the tallest building in town is like 4 stories, and there's fake windows painted on the top floor on the sides of that building. And then across the street from the museum, there's a landscape painted in the courtyard by the Armory building, and that has a poem that my sister wrote written on it. And then there's another one from a photo from Vesterheim's collection looking down Water Street the other way on Donlin Drug, and that is, another scene from the same spot the photo was taken, except 100 years earlier. And then there's the Nordic Fest parade is down across from Decorah Bank and Trust. And then I also have a mural on the senior center of a threshing scene.
And you've got one inside the Hotel Winnesheik?
Oh, yeah. There's one inside the Hotel Winnesheik, right on the landing going up the stairs.
Yeah, we're very lucky in Decorah to have those all around us all the time.
Yeah, and there's other murals in town, too, that are really nice. And come see them.
Definitely. Art has sometimes been described as a universal language. In your travels, does that seem accurate?
Oh, yeah. I think, it's just a natural thing for people to do, whether you just arrange seashells on a beach or, scratch your, something on a wall, or, just people have kind of a natural inclination to, express themselves non-verbally. And I think, anywhere you go, you can find art, people participating in it. And it's, I think, art happens on every single level, from just doodling, on your notepad next to your telephone all the way up to, Vermeer, Van Gogh. So it's it's a great thing, and I'm been happy to have been able to make a living doing it.
We're very happy about that too. There's a part 2 to that question. Okay. Have you ever encountered art that seemed inaccessible to you, either because of cultural or historical differences?
Yeah, I don't know why. I guess I'm kind of born too late, but I abstract art generally doesn't do much for me. The abstract expressionists, and I kind of like Jackson Pollock, but a lot of totally abstract work, just, I don't know. I mean, I understand, about it, and but it's not my favorite thing. I don't think art should have to come with a master's thesis.
And when we were talking in the sort of warm up today, I jokingly asked if you had a passport adventure story, and it turns out that you have one. Could you share that?
Yeah, I was on my way to, I was just a junior in college, and we were staying at a hotel in New York City, in Manhattan, and then we all got on the bus to take a charter flight to Vienna. All the students in, the Institute of European Studies program met in New York, and I got to the airport, and I didn't have my passport. And I called the hotel, and they said, "Yeah, we found it in your room." And I said, "Can you give it to a cab driver or something and send it out of there?" And they said, no, we can't risk that. They might not get it to you. So I had to jump in a cab, go down there, take a cab back to the airport. And I knew our flight had already been delayed like an hour. And I got back just in time, but then it was delayed another 2 hours. And so I thought, oh, great, I can relax for a few minutes, a little while. And everybody else was grumbling about a 3-hour delay, but I was thinking, man, that was a lucky thing, because I'd been hard to explain to my dad, why I needed another plane ticket.
Well, it sounds like your big adventure happened early in your travels. Have things gone smoothly ever since then?
Oh yeah, there's always some kind of adventure, because if you knew exactly what was going to happen, and if there was really no risk, well, then it's not an adventure. So, I've had some other things, like when I went to New Zealand. I knew I had to drive on the left side of the road, but they asked me if I minded getting a shift, manual shift camper van. I said, no, I've been driving a shift all my life. But all of a sudden, when it's on, the left side, and then the pattern's different, it's like I started driving out from the place, and I didn't know if I was going to make it down the block. So that was a kind of surprise. And about the time I got used to it, and then, the 2 weeks was over. So,
have any of these travel adventures made it into your artworks?
Pardon me?
Have any of the travel adventures made it into your artworks?
Oh, yeah. Well, the train ride across the Great Salt Lake, that's one, yeah. And then, the rafting down the Grand Canyon. Those are great adventures that, I've painted. And I've gotten, canoeing in the Boundary Waters, different sailing trips. In fact, kind of adventure's part of my, genre, I guess you could say. And there's a lot of pictures that aren't in the show that, I've done on my trips, kayaking and camping and skiing and different things, biking, hiking.
For this show at Vesterheim, we had you select the artworks for the exhibit. How did you select out of 50 years worth of work?
Well, that took a long, long time. I mean, it was because I have I've got so much to choose from. And so what I tried to do is I tried to get, the best pictures from each trip, like 1 or 2 or maybe at the most 3 pictures from each trip, and then get, a couple of the very best pictures from each kind of phase of my life. And so like each decade or so. And so I was very lucky, because a lot of my early pictures, the best ones, I sold to friends of mine, and I was able to borrow those back. And then I also have an awful lot, I have a copy of any of the woodcuts or etchings I've made, so I was able to go into that collection and pull out things. And then you might say I kind of got a little carried away, because then I thought, well, it'd be interesting, as long as I'm doing this, to, kind of explore, my career and my life. Because, if you're an artist, your life is illustrated. And so I thought, boy, I have enough self-portraits, to have a show. So I pulled out about a dozen good self-portraits, not necessarily good ones, but all through the different 50 years of self-portraits. And then I included the mural stuff. And then I have another panel about my life and travels and building my own house and studio. And then there's a section on digital art and photography. So there's a lot there in the woodcuts. There's a video about woodcuts, and there's also a video about painting murals. So there's a lot there to see, but I wanted to kind of include a lot of aspects of, and so fortunately, we were able to fit it in, and I think there's kind of something for everybody there.
Absolutely. And such a range of kinds of works, as you mentioned, murals to photography to watercolors, oils, sketches, even very informal works. Is
Yeah.
there any sort of bucket list for your art itself? You mentioned that Hawaii was on your bucket list for travel. What about your art? Is there a bucket list?
I want to kind of get it organized and, get all my photos of my artwork in one place. And I'm kind of going through that right now. I'm going through all my old backup hard drives, and I'm going to try to get the best photo I can find of each artwork and then kind of put all that in one place. And then I'm also sorting through a lot of it and, picking the good stuff from the mediocre and so on. And try to get rid of some of the not so good stuff. And so, I'm kind of sorting it through everything. Like I say, sometimes, he was a big collector. Better rent the big dumpster. So I don't want to, load all this stuff on my kids or my wife or my kids, because there's some great stuff there, but, it needs to be triaged, I guess.
Well, I think we have time for one last question. Some artists have created wonderful work without leaving home. Aside from the pleasures of travel itself, how essential has travel been to your development as an artist?
Well, that's a really interesting question because, I think the really essential thing is my home north of Decorah. And 10 years ago, I had a show at Vesterheim, and every single piece in that show was something I did within a quarter mile of my house. So a circle of a half mile diameter or so. And it's not like I just travel and do travel pictures or I just stay home and do pictures. I pretty much do pictures all the time. And I really feel like if I haven't done any art in a day, it's kind of a wasted day.